Something I was thinking about is how hard it is to write fan fiction. There's a number of obstacles that fans come across when they write fan fiction, such as, will any audience other than yourself enjoy your story? Will your story get read at all? And if it is read, will it be liked or will it be hated? Are you writing things in character, or are you writing a fantasy that you wish the characters were? Can your story fit into plausible show continuity and work as an episode of the series, or is it purely your own playground of ideas that you wish the show would do that it would actually never do ever? And if it is that, are you telling a good, well-written story? Will fans find it interesting, and so on? But a big thing that fan fictions have to deal with is, how does the changing continuity of an ongoing series affect what is written? A person could go through a couple of seasons of a show and get to a point where they feel inspired to write a story, and they can start writing that story. Then that series can come back and continue its episodes, and at some point that series could write something, some event, some episode that could completely undo that entire continuity of what the fans thought was going to happen with the characters. For example, many fans believed that the Dare & Do book series was written by Rainbow Dash's father, or Twilight's mother, or something like that. They believed that Dare & Do was written by some kind of author who had created Dare & Do fictionally. Then the series comes along and creates a canon that says Dare & Do is a real character, and she writes the novels about her own life, and they're not works of fiction, they're works of true life adventures retold in novelization. So when the series presents an unusual concept like that, it makes a fan fiction about the pony who is an author who writes Dare & Do novels based on other events that inspired Dare & Do seem outdated. If you have a story that says Dare & Do was written by Rainbow Dash's father, who was inspired by Rainbow Dash, and then later Rainbow Dash enjoys Dare & Do without having this knowledge, that's an interesting story. But now that Dare & Do is her own author, that story is now outdated and no longer makes sense in continuity to the series. So the point of that example is that whenever you write something about a series that's ongoing, the future episodes will always have the potential to do something that your imagination could never come up with, that you could never predict or expect, and they can take you into a direction that your series was never going in the first place, and you might have to take a step back and rewrite some of your story, or accept the fact that your story no longer made sense within the continuity of the series. Now, sometimes a fan fiction can do what the 100th episode gave us, and the fan fiction can write the continuity of the show, and the authors can take what the fans generally consider canon and they can canonize it, like they did with Dot and Derpy and Lyra and Bonbon and Vinyl and Octavia. But sometimes they can throw a Agent Sweetie Drops at us and send us into a curve that we would never have predicted. That's why when I think about it, a series that relies heavily on the show's continuity to tell its story has a lot harder work ahead of it than a series that's its own thing. In Dr. Hobbs and the Assistant, what makes that series appealing is that no matter what the series does, it will eventually land the Doctor and Derpy in the spots that they were in canon in the background of the episodes. It'll explain how they got there and where they go next. But in order for that to work, the series has to dictate to the fan writers where Dot and Derpy and the other characters will be in every episode. Then the writers have to think of what came before and after that background appearance. And how do you make these background appearances work? Now that the My Little Pony series has done 5 seasons and the Dot and Assistant series has only done 1 season, that's a lot of catching up that they have to do. And they have to keep on track with the direction the series is going in. Once they start getting ahead of themselves, they start writing things that the series itself will probably never touch on. In the case of Flufflepuff, you have something that is its own thing. You have Flufflepuff and Dan and Chrysalis sharing a room with Twilight in her library, and little to no explanation as to how all of these characters came together. And then Flufflepuff steals the show, and all of the shorts are about her and her being adorable. The fact that Flufflepuff and Dan are not in the series, and Chrysalis in canon will never have a relationship with a fluffy pink pony creature, is in no way going to affect the series itself. No matter what My Little Pony does, even if it blows up the library and removes that as a location, it's not going to affect the series. Flufflepuff will always be Flufflepuff no matter what My Little Pony does in canon. And Flufflepuff will always have its own canon that ignores whatever the show is doing and just continues to give Chrysalis this relationship with this pink lovable fluffball. Dan will always be there in the background as a background character. The rest of the main 6 will always be bit players. In another example, like Fall of the Crystal Empire, now you have fans trying to tell their own interpretation of how they think an event in the show went down. And we have a relatively good story there. But at any moment, the show canon can come along and toss that fanfic out completely and write their own in-canon flashback of the war between the princesses and King Somber and what events caused the Crystal Empire to fall. And at that point, the series can mimic what the fans came up with, or it can create a completely new interpretation of what they think really happened in that era. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're writing fanfics, and you're trying to tell some kind of story that pieces together all of your headcanons of things that the show never explained. If the show ever does explain those events in show canon and headcanon will bump into each other, and the show canon will crush your headcanon, and your fan fiction will be a bunch of stories that is no longer supported by the events in the series. If you can take your creative idea and you can create a world where things are clearly different and show canon doesn't matter, then you have a series that can continue every day, and the show canon will be no influence on your fanfic canon. Some ways to do this would be maybe to set your story so far in the future or the past that the series canon no longer matters, or to make it clear that this is a what-if story that exists in a parallel universe where the series canon doesn't affect your characters. Or maybe to make up characters that go on their own unique adventures and don't live in Ponyville and don't interact with the main sets, but still abide by the laws of what the show said Equestria is. Maybe have your characters live in a Pony Pun city that you create yourself. So that way the idea is completely all yours and it doesn't interact with pre-existing characters and doesn't require them to have details in the show that will affect your series later on. Then your series can continue being whatever it wants to be, and you don't have to worry about the show saying in canon that the events of your series could never have happened. Or maybe you can take something that the show seeds but will clearly never grow. For example, the adventures of Cranky Doodle Donkey and Stephen Magnet. They will probably never touch on that story any further than they did in Slice of Life, which means it's a perfect opening for fanfics to come in and fill the gaps, because it's very unlikely that the show will say in canon what these characters did. Well, in the end, you don't really have to take my advice, just saying that's a thought that popped into my head. Even I myself have written fanfics. I wrote one about Channel Awesome, you know, the Nostalgia Critic and Ankara and all them people. And then the events of To Boldly Flee took everything that I wrote and tossed it out and wrote their own story. In that a huge chunk of what I had written could never happen in canon to the Channel Awesome characters unless the events of To Boldly Flee were ignored. Anyhow, that's all for my thoughts. Tell me any thoughts you have in the comments section below. Thank you for watching and good night.